Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. My name is Heidi Roth, and I'm a registered dietitian. And welcome to our holiday casseroles made healthy. So we're going to be making two different casseroles today, and we're going to be making an acorn squash casserole, as well as a spinach parmesan potato gratin. So we've got some ambitious cooking for our half an hour. So grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get started. Feel free. If you see me looking down, I actually have my chat box open in my computer. So I encourage you to use the chat box to ask any questions. That's one of the nice perks about joining something live. So we're going to start with our acorn squash casserole. And in the interest of time, I did a little bit of a cheat, and the recipe, which I will share at the end, I'll show you all the recipes at the end, so don't forget. So there's two different recipes. One's an acorn squash casserole that I got from allrecipes.com, and I adapted it from that. And then the other one is from Eating Well, so you can also look those up online too. So with the acorn squash casserole, typically what you would do is take an acorn squash, you'd cut it open, scrape out the seeds, bake it, and then put it in a food processor and puree it. And basically what you end up with is a squash puree like this. Now, that is all well and good, but there is an easier way and a faster way. And so I like to buy the cooked pureed squash. It's already cooked, already pureed. All you have to do is defrost it and you're ready to go. So there's two different types. Bird's Eye makes one. It's a butternut squash. So very similar. It's a winter squash that would be very similar to the acorn squash casserole. This one is fine, but they also add some canola oil as well as some salt to this one. So I actually prefer, if you can find at your store, just the plain cooked squash. So I apologize for this label. I was in a bit of a hurry opening it, and I just tore it open and forgot to save the label for you all. But I did save a little bit. So you can see it's just a plain cooked squash. If you look at the label, it just says cooked squash. And it doesn't even tell you what type of squash it is, but it is some form of winter squash, most likely something like a butternut or even an acorn squash. So either one of these is fine. So here I have 3 packages of the squash. I have 2 of these and one of this, just because it happened to be what I had in my freezer. So 3 packages of squash. And then just going to put that aside right now. You're going to defrost it in the microwave and stir it just so that it's to the point where you can stir it. Now we're also going to be making a nut topping for this as well. And so I'm kind of excited about the nut topping. So for the kind of streusel topping that we're going to add, we're going to make it easier. A lot of times it tells you to kind of crumble the softened butter with the flour and the nuts. Too much work. I just melt the butter and it works very well also. So I have 3 tablespoons of melted butter in here that I'm going to put in there. And then to that, I'm also going to add a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Now I did cut down on the brown sugar from the original recipe because you want this to be a side dish for your meal. You're not looking to make it a dessert. It's already a little bit desserty to begin with. So if you wanted it as a dessert, you could add some more sugar, but that's not what I'm going for. So I cut the sugar down to a 1/4 cup, add a little bit of salt. I'm just going to do kind of a little, little dash of salt, little sprinkle of salt there. And then we have 1/2 cup of nuts, chopped nuts, a little dash of cinnamon. Now, the original recipe called for 1/2 cup of white flour. And, white flour really doesn't have much nutritional value to it other than, a lot of carbohydrates and starch. So I actually cut down the flour to 1/4 cup of the flour, and I'm going to add for the other 1/4 cup a more nutrient dense flour. So I'm going to actually add in some almond flour. You could add in some hazelnut flour, you could add in some pecan flour, you could add in wheat germ. So there's a lot of just different choices that you could add in, or you just keep it to, the 1/2 cup of white flour. Oh, actually, a 1/2 cup of oats would actually be really nice too. So kind of choose what you want to add. But we're going to add in, I'm going to add in some almond flour. So, and then we're just going to mix that all together. This is going to become like our crumbly little topping to put on top. So now for our squash casserole, here we go. Going to add in a 1/4 cup of half and half. And the original recipe called for 1/4 cup of sugar. Once again, we're not looking for a dessert. So I actually cut that back down to 1 tablespoon of sugar. So just 1 tablespoon of sugar. And then 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. So this is my 100% vanilla extract. Now, if you wanted to, you could also add a little bit more cinnamon to this as well, or a little dash of nutmeg would be nice, or some pumpkin spice, whatever you have on hand. I'm actually going to add a little bit more cinnamon. And cinnamon is nice because cinnamon has some properties that help decrease blood sugar levels. So where we're kind of adding some sugar to this, nice to have that. Now, as you can see, this is pretty soupy right now. So we're going to need something while it's in the oven to kind of firm it up a little bit. So I'm going to add in 2 eggs. And just go ahead and mix those in quickly. Now, I do have my garbage can next to me. I'm not just throwing things on the floor. That is one kind of kitchen hack, is having your garbage can close by you so that you can easily throw stuff in there. And actually for this, I might get out my whisk. Away some of my dirty dishes here. Okay. So I'm seeing a question. Could you do all almond flour to make it gluten-free? Yes, 100%. You could do all almond flour. It would change the consistency of a little bit, probably to make it gluten-free. Trying to figure out what's beeping, it's my dishwasher. To make it one other way to make it gluten-free as well is just to use some gluten-free flour in place of the regular flour, and then use, half almond, half gluten-free flour. But I have used 100% almond before, and that works very well also. So just going to take this, whisk it up really quick. But that was a great question. What type of nuts did you recommend? So I use pecans. Pecans are my all-time favorite nut. You could use walnuts, you could use almonds, hazelnuts. You just basically want some raw nuts because you don't want them to get too toasted while they're in the oven. Any type of raw nut would work. You could even use coconut. That would be nice too, like an untoasted coconut would be lovely as well. So whatever floats your boat. You could even use some pumpkin seeds for something different. Pumpkin seeds have a lot of nutrition to them. A lot of zinc, a lot of magnesium. So those would be a very healthy addition too. So I'm going to go ahead and pour it into my casserole dish. And then we're going to bake that in the oven. I've got my oven heated up at 350. And then we'll put that in there it's supposed to be for half an hour, but in the interest of our food demo, it's going to be a little bit faster. So I'm going to put this kind of on top and then toss it. Now, if I had more time, I would probably very carefully sprinkle this on, make sure it was very evenly spaced out. But we've got an ambitious agenda today, so we're just gonna pop this in. Okay, so here's a question for you all. What gives squash that beautiful orange color and a lot of the health benefits to it too? Does anybody know what kind of food nutrient does that? Answer it in the chat box if you know the answer. Well, that was very quick. I'm seeing a couple people say beta carotene, and you are all 100% correct. Yes, beta carotene gives that gorgeous orange color. Your body then takes beta carotene and converts it into vitamin A. So, you know, making sure during the winter time that you're eating, especially lots of beta carotene containing foods, because vitamin A, like many nutrients, is really important for your immune system. All right, so the next thing we're going to be making is some Parmesan scalloped potatoes. And typically, scalloped potatoes are delicious, but they're typically very cheesy, very heavy. You use a cup of cream, and you know, maybe for that one time a year that you do them, that's the way that you want to do them. But perhaps you're looking for something a little bit healthier. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in some spinach. And instead of the cream, we're going to be making a cream sauce, a bechamel sauce. Bechamel. And so we're going to start by making what's called a roux. So with a roux, you take some sort of flour, and a roux is spelled R-U-O-X. It's a French word. And it basically refers to having some fat and some flour mixed together to thicken your sauce. So instead of heavy cream, we're going to be using whole milk. Now, the other thing that typically happens with scalloped potatoes is they take a long, long time to cook, because the potatoes take a while to cook in the oven like that. So what this recipe calls for is to kind of pre-cook your potatoes. You slice them into 1/4-inch thick slices. You take about 1.5 pounds of potatoes, 1/4-inch thick slices, and I put them on my baking sheet on my parchment paper. And I baked them for about 20 to 25 minutes, just until they're tender. And that kind of gets the potatoes a nice head start, so that you don't have to put this in the oven for, you know, 1.5 hours trying to get those potatoes softened up. So let's go ahead and start our roux. Now with a roux, a lot of times you would use butter, and you certainly could use butter for this dish as well. I'm actually going to use some extra virgin olive oil, and I'm going to use 3 tablespoons of it. So 1, 2, 3. You can measure out 3 tablespoons, but you know, after you cook a while, you kind of get a sense of what 3 tablespoons looks like. So if it's a little more, a little less, that's fine. And to that, I'm going to add 1 small onion, finely minced, and actually finely chopped. What's the difference between chopped and minced? Minced is where you chop in really, really small pieces. Typically, that would be something like garlic. You would mince some garlic. And this is going to be very finely chopped or diced. So, you know, whenever you see something to be minced, it's really, really small pieces. All right, so I've got this going here. I'm going to what I'm going to do is brown my onions for 2 to 3 minutes so that they're softened up. And then after that, I'm going to add in 3 tablespoons of flour. And this is where, you know, we're making that flour and, you know, fat mixture for the roux. Now, let's say that you were gluten-free. What could you do instead? Two different things. You could use a gluten-free flour. Most of the gluten-free flours are 1-to-1. And so you can just add in the same amount of regular gluten-free flour and that'll work fine. The other thing that you could do is add in cornstarch to thicken it up. And so if you're adding cornstarch, I would add a lot less. You don't want, cornstarch has more thickening power. So you want it to be less. You don't want it to be that much. So you probably add in about a tablespoon of cornstarch. What I would do is I would mix the cornstarch in with some cold water, make a little slurry, and then put it in there. All right, so my onions are starting to brown. After they do a little bit, add in my flour. And then we're going to add in half a teaspoon of salt and 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. Now, as you can see, I have them in this little tiny jar. This actually was a little jar of honey that someone brought me back from Hawaii. And I saved the lid. These little jars are lovely just to kind of have, you know, if you have a little tiny scrap of something that you want to save, or you're trying to get all your ingredients out, called mise en place beforehand, you know, save these little jars. And then we're also going to add in to my onion, once my onion is almost all browned, 2 cloves of garlic. And what is garlic good for? Other than keeping vampires away, does anybody know what garlic is especially really good for? Put it in the chat box. And then we'll add in 2½ cups of milk. I'm going to use whole milk, and because I want a little bit of richness to it, so that's why I'll add in the whole milk. Okay, so pretend that my onions have browned a little bit longer, but just in the interest of time, we're going to get things going here. So I'm going to add in my garlic, 2 cloves of garlic. Not seeing any answers, so I'll give you that. I'll tell you, garlic is especially good for your immune system. Good for your heart. It's good for decreasing inflammation, but it's also really good for helping your immune system in tip-top shape. So make sure you're using lots of garlic during the winter time. So now what I'm doing is I'm just mixing in my flour into my onions with my fat. And you can see that's what it looks like at this point. Now, the longer that you kind of brown this flour and fat mixture, kind of the less flour taste you'll get. But the longer you let it cook, and if it starts to brown, you do lose a little bit of thickening power from the flour. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. And 2½ cups of milk. There we go. So I'll add this in. So we're basically kind of making this, you know, cream sauce, and then we're going to mix our spinach into it and then layer it with the potatoes. So with these cream sauces, what you have to do, these, you know, thickened with the roux, you have to let them come to a boil and then let it simmer for a little bit. And the longer it simmers, the kind of more, the thicker it will get. So this cream sauce is the same type of sauce that you would use if you were making like a Greek moussaka, or sometimes the lasagna recipes will call for this type of cream sauce, or macaroni and cheese. So it's a very common sauce that you would use in a lot of different types of cooking. So adding in my 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And so if I were going to make macaroni and cheese at this point, you know, once it came to a boil, I would add in my cheese. Okay, So we're going to just kind of set that aside, let that come to a boil a little bit, and then we'll start showing you what we're going to do with the rest of the dish. So we're going to use spinach for this, and this is a great way to get some extra greens. You know, one of the things with all healthy diets, there's a lot of diet wars out there, right? Diets can be even more controversial than politics sometimes. But one thing that everyone agrees on, whether you're vegan or paleo or Mediterranean or keto, greens, leafy greens are one thing that you really want to include into your diet. And so the great thing about these scalloped potatoes is we're going to add in some leafy greens, and we're going to add them in a really quick and convenient way, which is some chopped frozen spinach. Leafy greens, typically, ideally, you want to get them as organic if you can. There are a fair amount of pesticides, but leafy greens are so healthy however you get them, just making sure that you're eating your leafy greens. So this is one kind of delicious way to squeeze in a little bit more of the leafy greens. So what we're going to do here is maybe just add in a little bit of olive oil just to the bottom of our casserole dish, just to kind of prevent things from sticking. Swirl that around a little bit. And then we're going to add in one layer of our potatoes. I have my potatoes here that I've baked on my parchment paper. You know, just a PSA. I never thought that this really needed to be said, but apparently it does. This is parchment paper, and you cannot substitute wax paper for parchment paper. My husband very kindly made dinner last night, which was lovely. However, couldn't find the parchment paper, so he used wax paper to bake the potatoes. So not these potatoes, this is parchment paper. So anyways, making sure that you're using parchment, not wax. So I'm just going to take half of my potatoes, kind of layer them in here at the bottom of my pan. And these, you know, are going to be warm, and our sauce is going to be warm. These have cooled down a little bit, but basically this is basically going to be all cooked already. We're just going to be adding in our sauce, you know, our sauce to it, and kind of putting it into the broiler. So it cooks very fast. So my sauce is kind of simmering here a little bit. So now I'm going to take some Parmesan cheese, and I'm going to sprinkle it over well, actually, I'm going to do the first layer once I put the sauce on. So we're going to take our spinach now and put that into the sauce. So I've got here 1 pound of spinach. You know, the recipe calls for a pound of spinach. It's actually a fair amount of spinach. I'm just kind of pressing some extra of the water out now. I'm going to use most of the pound, but maybe a little bit less of it. All right. Scooch that in there. And the frozen spinach, once again, you want to make sure that it's thawed and that you do squeeze a little bit of the water out. Okay. So now we've got our sauce, which is all cooked and ready to go. And oh, that is beautiful. Perfect. So we are getting so many leafy greens from the sauce, along with the potatoes and cheese. It's going to be delicious. So here's what our sauce looks like. So you can see, right, it's, there we go, kind of thickened up. So I'm going to pour half the sauce on top. And had I let that cook a little bit longer, it would have thickened up a little bit more. And then just kind of spread that out. And now I'm going to use half a cup of Parmesan cheese. Put that on. Going to be nice and Parmesan-y. And then the rest of our, oops, wait, no. I'm looking at the time, we're almost out of time here. So now we're gonna put the rest of our potatoes on. Just kind of just slide them on like that. They're all spread out already. And then our sauce. And and if you wanted to, you could add more potatoes and less spinach. I made mine especially kind of spinach heavy, just because trying to get some more leafy greens in. Well, there we go. Now we'll put another half a cup of Parmesan cheese on top. You could also use a different type of cheese if you wanted to put some Gruyere on here or some cheddar cheese, whatever worked for you. And now I'm going to put this under the broiler just to kind of get that all broiled, and I'll show you what the squash casserole looks like. So I'm going to turn my oven on to broil. Okay, so while we're waiting for that to broil, here are the recipes. So you can take a screenshot of these. And also, if you want, can you see that? I don't know, that light's a little bright, maybe. There, that's better. What you can also do is go to allrecipes.com and look up acorn squash casserole. Is also an easy way to do it, to get that online. Here's the other one, and this is the Parmesan scalloped potatoes. That you can also take a screenshot of that. Once again, you could also go to eatingwell.com and look Parmesan scalloped potatoes with spinach, and that's where that recipe came from. Okay, so let me see, no more questions, and let me go get these casseroles for you, and you can see what the finished product looks like. Okay. So here is a squash casserole. I don't want to tip it too much because it is not quite done yet. Do you see how jiggly that is? That is clearly not done. It's going to need a little bit longer. If I put it in a shallower pan, it probably would have cooked a little faster. What you're looking for is no jiggle, maybe just a tiny bit of jiggle in the middle, like a pumpkin pie. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back. And here you can see this one is pretty much done and ready to eat. And that's what this one looks like. Lots of cheesy goodness and lots of spinach and potatoes. And that is going to be delicious. If you wanted to make it gluten-free or, if you wanted to make it 100% plant-based, what you could also do is you could use a vegan Parmesan cheese, and just a plant-based milk would also work very well also. So looks like we're out of time now. Thank you all so much for joining me here today. I don't see, let's see. Oh, I'm seeing a question here. Can you repeat the website the recipes are located? Absolutely. So once again, we have our Parmesan potatoes with scalloped spinach, and that is from eatingwell.com. Parmesan scalloped potatoes with spinach. And then the next one is an acorn squash casserole, and that was adapted from allrecipes.com. So basically, I did the recipe, but I cut down on the sugar. So allrecipes.com and eatingwell.com. Okay, so, all right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me here today. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, that you're able to make some of these recipes, and best wishes for the start of 2023. I can't believe it's so close. So thank you all again for joining me here today. Thank you.